Hello everyone and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello and welcome to this weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast interview. Today we're delighted to welcome back friend of the pod, Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP, the International Automotive Retailing Consultancy, and Managing Director of Auto West London, the all-new Omoda and Jaecoo site, which opened for business in March and marked the UK debut of Çağtaş Automotive, Turkey's biggest dealer group. With plenty going on in the car retailing sector this week, we'll be getting his take on the government's new EV grant announcement and other recent developments. Then, after the midway break, we'll have an update on his experiences as a dealer boss. So welcome back to the pod, Steve. Great to have you on. Clearly busy days and interesting times for you.
Yes, thanks, Curtis, and thank you, Phil. And yes, definitely busy, definitely interesting. Lots to talk about.
Trying to get your head around everything, and I can well imagine. Obviously, from Curtis' introduction there, from an ICDP perspective in terms of those broader market dynamics, but also from the front end operational side as to what some of this might mean for you. So you've got both hats on today, for very, very clearly.
Yeah, I think it's the two fit together very well in terms of the slightly higher level, helicopter view, if you like, of what's going on across Europe, and then the sharp end of speaking to customers and dealing with manufacturers and potential partners and so on. So it's a great combination.
Yeah, definitely. So as Kurt said, we were speaking on the day on Tuesday morning, where we've obviously following the government's announcement of the introduction of the 650 million or return of the plug-in grant on new electric vehicles. Now, it's all still fairly unclear at the minute. There's still quite a bit to be defined in terms of what you actually get, and the reports are that it's anything from up to £1,500 to £3,750 on EVs priced up to £37,000 to start with immediate effect. Now, that was obviously following the weekend's announcement of 63 million worth of funding to boost the EV charging infrastructure. We know that some of that was to do with NHS and other areas of that infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot to be worked out here in terms of what this means, and we know that it's isolating those vehicles above £37,000, but there's reports. Is this kind of trying to look after domestic product and the likes of Nissan and other vehicles? But is that quite a dangerous move for the government with this?
Well, I think as you said, we don't have all the details yet, and there's always a bit of double counting going on. If you look at the 63 million, then it includes some NHS spend on electric vehicles, but the NHS would have spent a chunk of money on vehicles of some sort anyway. So this is not all new money. But I think there's obviously a number of different elements to this. The first one is whether a subsidy on new cars actually makes any sense anyway. And whether it's a meaningful amount of money. I think the question is whether the consumers will actually see any difference, because the £3,000 or whatever from the government might just be £3,000 less that the manufacturer has to put into supporting the pricing. And so the industry might breathe a sigh of relief, but the consumer won't actually see any difference whatsoever. So I'm not sure financially that's so important. I think it is important that there's a strong signal. I think that the messages from government on electric vehicles have been so messed up for the last 2 or 3 years that customers, genuinely don't know what's going on. So at least this does demonstrate with a meaningful, or an apparently meaningful sum of money, that we are on a road to electrification, and consumers can have some confidence in that. So I think that's more important than the money itself. I think about supporting the home industry. Well, the reality is that although it saddens me to say so, we don't really have a home industry in terms of manufacturing. Certainly not at the level of £37,000 and below for passenger cars. We're great at the top end stuff, and we do have Nissan and we've got Toyota, but the only electric car that would qualify that was produced in the UK would be the Leaf when it goes back into production next year. I mean, at the moment you can't buy a Leaf. So I think that the whole thing is really, frankly, a bit of a mess. It gets a headline. If I was going to put £650 million in, I wouldn't put it into a new car support.
Yeah.
It's not actually that meaningful in terms of the amount of money that has been put in. SMMT talks about £6.5 billion that's been spent by the industry on supporting the sale of electric vehicles over the last couple of years since we've had the ZEV mandate. So the money that the government's putting in over the next 3 years is 10% of what the industry's put in 18 months.
Yeah.
So we could go on about this forever.
It is that, yeah.
So,
and I suppose it's the question that, because retail or consumer private registrations is basically an all-time low. It's, we know that the market is being underpinned by the fleet and business sector. And to your point earlier, the majority of vehicles are on some kind of finance offering, be it PCP or other. And therefore, when you start to look at anything from 1,500 to 3,750 in the bigger scheme of things, when it comes down to a monthly payment, it's not going to really move that dial, is it?
Well, particularly when the residuals could easily move by more than that amount in over the 3-year term. So the real issue that we have is weak demand for the used BEVs, which are dependent on retail demand, whereas the new sales are to some extent incentivized by the tax treatment for salary sacrifice and so on. So it's the used vehicle market that we need to focus on to make customers confident that they can buy a used electric car and should do. And the more support that goes into the front end, the more that depresses the residual values at the back end. So I'm not suggesting there's an easy solution, but in the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that many people don't believe that a BEV is the right option for them, and they would rather go for a hybrid or pure ICE vehicle.
Yeah, and as you say, it's a bit risky, particularly on that residual value when that additional money new has that potential knock-on effect, particularly in that 0 to 12, 0 to 24 month market of that cost of entry, which hits the residual values, which could, as you say, negate that initial upfront discount.
Yeah, and I think I know it's not a popular point of view as to whether plug-in hybrids offer a transition path, but I'm driving an Omoda 9 at the moment, which has got 90 miles of battery range. And so my commute is about 70 odd miles. I'm running that car effectively as a pure electric car. But if I've got a longer journey, if I'm coming up to see you, Philip, then I've got the engine there. And I think it's a perfectly legitimate choice. And we get back to the whole logic of the ZEV mandate and the way it was designed.
And Steve, staying with EVs, you presented at the recent BVRLA, that's the British Vehicle Rental and Leasing Association conference, and it was themed around the challenges facing fleets transitioning to electric. And one of the big talking points, which we certainly picked up on last weekend's podcast, was the impact of those falling EV residual values on D-fleets. What action do you think is required to stimulate the used EV market?
I think it's primarily around confidence and cost of ownership. I think that clearly all the same issues apply about do people have confidence in the charging infrastructure and so on, for new or used. But I think when it's a used car buyer, then they're maybe on a more limited budget and they're more value conscious. And if they don't have their own charging facility at home and they're paying 50 pence or more, per sort of kilowatt hour on a public charging system, then that's a problem. And that's where you've got, for example, the issue about the 20% VAT applying to electricity at public charging points. Maybe some of that 650 million would have been better spent on um, reducing the VAT rate on public charging so that the cost of ownership equation looked better, and then that would be more attractive, to the used car buyers as well as new. But I think the focus needs to be around that area. I'm not a great fan of just straight subsidies. It's got to be about making the ownership experience easier, giving people more confidence, and then that will drive more customers into the used BEVs. That will support the RVs. That will feed back into more affordable new cars.
And I guess one of the potential impacts of this incentive that's just been introduced to the government is that new car prices could drop lower and make new cars more a favourable or affordable purchase than buying a used EV. And the dealer then has the dilemma of not being able to sell the used car vehicles they've acquired for stock.
Exactly. You've got lots of 0% deals on a new BEV. Now we've got an extra element of government subsidy in there for at least some of them. A good interest rate on a used car is going to be 9%. Some people will be paying significantly more than that, and so on a price per month basis, and then build in some concerns about the support and so on. Yeah, manufacturer warranty is probably transferable. Battery warranty is 8 years, but how what confidence have you got as a used car buyer that that's actually going to be entirely seamless and reliable and so on? And there are what I consider relatively small things like battery health checks, that should be universal. That's within the power of the industry and the individual players within the industry to do that. We could introduce, as a dealer group, we could introduce, a battery health check on all our used BEVs, tomorrow if we wanted to. We don't have enough volume to justify that, but that's within our own control. It's multifaceted.
And just switching on another theme, and recently the ICDP published the car buyer of the future, which dispels a few, let's say, industry myths around car ownership and the way cars will be sold. I mean, what were some of the key takeaways from that report, would you say, Steve?
Well, I think as you said, the whole report is themed around picking up on some myths, like customers will want to buy online, and the number of dealer visits is reducing. Where our evidence over now 13 years of doing our own consumer research says that both of those are not true. The opposite is true. But the takeaways were really that with much better educated customers who are able to get access to massive amount of information from multiple sources online, then the traditional thinking about the sales funnel and how you treat customers and then put them through a standardized process and so on, is outdated. And as customers are following omni-channel journeys, using online, offline, using manufacturer resources, dealer resources, and the manufacturers and dealers, need to work more closely together to deliver, a great customer experience. And then I think the networks themselves are still designed and reflect an age that is past and been past for quite some time, really, in terms of the size of networks and the scale of the facilities and so on and so forth. And I think we need to look at that whole element, to genuinely look at the physical and the digital as sort of a single capability, that needs to be more balanced in the future. So I think those were probably the key takeaways. But there's a lot to do still in the traditional network, space, if you like.
Yeah, and I think, I had the pleasure of joining the webinar and getting a copy of the report. And as you say, I'm trying to get rid of that whole everybody wants to go online and this whole new process and, this whole agency shift and then not. So, yeah, I can imagine. For the listeners that didn't get to join that, where can they get the report? Is it available still on the ICDP.net website?
Well, if they email myself, Steve Young, or email project office at icdp.net, then we'll get a copy of the report out. It's free of charge. It's our gift to the industry.
Yeah, very nice gift as well. Thank you.
And just to round off the first half of today's pod, Steve, in your latest blog, which is available on the ICDP website, you make an interesting observation about adapting to uncertain times. And we've already covered some of those uncertainties, from EVs, agency, consumer confidence, to the impact of tariffs on the UK. How do you see dealers adapting to uncertainties? What's the best way that they can look to do that?
I think it depends on the individual dealer and their commitment to staying in the sector. Clearly, one way to dodge the uncertainty is to cash in. But if you've decided that you want to stay in the sector, then I just think it is all about flexibility, because you can have no confidence that you have the right strategy at the moment in terms of your physical footprint, your investments in digital, your the brand portfolio that you have, and so on. All of that could change, almost in an instant.
Yeah.
So we're just looking at bringing a digital tool into Auto West London. Some of the AI that sits behind that is less than 2 months old, and in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, then there'll be some more developments. And so it's really moving at a massively accelerated pace compared to, say, 20 years ago. So it's all about flexibility, about responsiveness, keeping some options open, not just putting your head down and thinking, well, if I just cut costs and manage within the space that I'm in, then it'll be okay. It'll all come good. It won't. You will get caught out, maybe by tariffs, maybe by what happens to your manufacturer, maybe by, what happens to customer journeys, but something will catch you out, because everything is up for grabs at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll be hearing more about Auto West London in the second half after this short break.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on a special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising.
And Steve, we obviously couldn't have you back on the podcast without getting an update onto how Auto West London is bedding in. And it's as Curtis said there, you've been open since March, new straight up, and you were just alluding to there that, things are moving extremely quickly and representing both Jaecoo and Omoda in Chiswick. From the SMMT's recent registration data that we talk about regularly on the podcast, both brands are doing, let's say, pretty well as they establish themselves in the UK. From your perspective, how is business going, and how is that relationship with the new brands, and how are you seeing the market?
It's going extremely well. It's going better than I'd assumed, and certainly much better than you might assume you would do as a new startup with a new brand. The product is great. It's well received by customers. We're fortunate; we're in a relatively wealthy part of the country, but we have customers who are coming in. Most of them are trading in premium product. 80%, Mercedes, BMW, Land Rover, etc., to buy Omoda and Jaecoo. And they're not buying our products because they can't afford to buy a BMW or whatever. They're coming in because they can see through their research, through what they read in the press, that they're getting a lot more technology, great quality for less money, and they're thinking, well, why should I pay for the badge, as the Jaecoo advertising says? We had a very sort of prominent banker come in last week who could have bought any car he wanted, and he's bought an '09 because he just recognised his value. And so I think that is the great thing about it, and we're very happy with it. The relationship with the manufacturer, you have some friction, as you do with any manufacturer, and you also have some some flaws because they are also in startup mode. They're still getting going and launching new things, and there's a whole lot of stuff coming from their side as well as things coming from our side. So it's clearly not a mature situation as you would be if you were an established dealer group dealing with Ford, for example. But no, it's going well. We're hopeful we'll beat our or we'll reach our year 2 business plan targets in year 1. So
That's a
that'll
great
be
result. I suppose from your perspective there, that you've got you're a startup. Let's say you are startup in the UK. From a business perspective, very much that new area where you've opened up there down in Chiswick there. But again, you're probably learning together, aren't you, in terms of the brand entering the UK market?
Yes, I think so. I think everyone is head down trying to get on with things. So maybe we don't spend as much time sharing knowledge as we should do. But we are making progress. I know that Omoda and Jaecoo have got some good advice from people that we both know and many listeners would know, which is helping them to position the brand well, and they've got an amazing ad agency on board. I mean, I'm not a great fan of most car advertising, but the Omoda and Jaecoo stuff really hits the mark as far as I'm concerned. So they've got a great agency there, which is helping, and the customers are coming through the doors. We've now got since starting effectively mid-March, then we've now got 5 salespeople plus the sales manager, sales director, so a total team of seven people, and that's just keeping up with demand.
That's good. That's good. And I mean, as part of your launch, I think you mentioned previously you organised a pop-up at Battersea Power Station. How did that go?
Clearly, we didn't know how, because we got no experience.
But yes,
Itself relatively new, but the options for us in terms of doing something similar were basically Westfield at White City or Battersea, and the costs at Westfield are eye-watering. Battersea is a different sort of environment. It's much more of a leisure environment. People are there for more time, I think. This is just by observation. This is not based on their PR material or anything. And so people are going there. They're going for a meal, going to cinema. They just want to see the building. And so we were really quite positively impressed by the quality of the contacts that we made there. And I'm sure we will go back to Battersea. I'm not sure I've got an appetite to go to spend the sort of money that Westfield need with the sort of traffic that you have going through Westfield. But we had the Omoda robotic dog there. We could have sold that a few times over. Maybe appropriate in Battersea, really. I'm not sure.
Is the one at
Yes.
Chateau Steve at Young, or no? You get one back
Not a robotic one, no. But it's as equally hyperactive as the robotic one. They both do a good dance.
Steve, since last time we spoke, you've refurbished and opened a second Auto West London site, which is 5 miles away from Chiswick in southwest London. And from my understanding, it's primarily for vehicle preparation, after sales, and used cars. What was the thinking behind this, and how is that going?
Well, for anyone who knows the Chiswick site, on the A4 by, the Fuller's, brewery, then it's a very prominent site, very high profile site, which is great for sales, but it has no space for a used car display and no provision or planning permission for that matter that would allow you to do after sales. So we knew we would have a second site somewhere. And we looked at a few options, but the site that we've gone for in Wandsworth is an old dealer site, been a dealer site for 100 years. So it's not your classic sort of box, but it works for us. It's convenient enough, given the difficulties of London traffic, which is just part of operating in this part of the world.
Yeah.
And we've got space there to store about 40 cars, which is good. We've got 2 workshops, we've got a showroom, and some outdoor space. So, and because it's not a classic box, then we're not paying the same sort of money as we are obviously for a high profile site like Chiswick. So the showroom is basically ready to occupy. The workshops will take a little bit longer to get ready, but we should be all finished by end of August. And then the question is whether we put another new car franchise into the dealer side of it, or just treat it as a used car site. And we've got the options as to what we do there.
And in terms of having that used car presence, will that be for the part exchanges that you're generating, or will it also be for Jaecoo and Omoda used cars?
Well, it'll be for both. I mean, we're obviously having been in operation now for 3 months. We're starting to get some of the demonstrators and employee cars, coming up on the market. We've actually just sold the first one this morning. So there will be Omoda Jaecoo used cars, but also the trade-ins, and we'll also do some active, buying and selling, because if you're going to be in the used car business, then you need to be in it properly. There's no point in being being resourced to support, selling, 10 or 15 cars, a month. If you're going to be resourced to sell used cars, then you might as well, try and do, ideally in the end, obviously the classic 1-to-1 if we can.
Yeah, no, like you say, you've got to be either, if you're going to go to used cars, then go into it and run an operation, or the used car operation, rather than just the selling of part exchange or ex demonstrators, because that doesn't give you what you need. And I mean, and finally, Steve, I mean, over recent weeks, we've been doing a lot of reporting on the headline podcast on the Saturdays about new Chinese brands in the main entering the UK before the end of this year, from Geely Auto, Shanghang, to BYD's Denza brand, and Cherry Auto, who are obviously the owners of both Omoda and Jaecoo. I mean, what are the challenges facing you as a retailer to get your brands noticed with so much entrance noise, or is it just business as usual?
I can only really speak for Omoda Jaecoo in terms of personal experience. I suspect, though, that the same would be true for BYD and MG as the other two sort of well established brands. or relatively well-established brands. The customers are coming to us. They're finding the cars, they're finding the information, they're curious, they want to see and feel and touch. I think when you've got a number of other brands who are coming along, and particularly when they're only coming along with one model to start off with or two models, then that's probably going to be more difficult for them to get noticed. And so, my advice to anyone, and the way that we look at it ourselves, is that you need to do a bit of homework, find out about the brand, understand where it is in China. If we're talking about only the Chinese entrants, understand where it is in China, how committed are they, what homework have they done themselves to prior to coming into the market. But there will be more than clearly the three brands I mentioned in the market in the long term. It's just a question of which of them will be here in the long term.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, you may not be able to or want to answer this question as a follow-up, but in terms of Chery Auto and where that sits alongside Omoda and Jaecoo, is that potentially an obvious fit, or do you think that's does that sit elsewhere? I mean, is the plan, do you think, that with Omoda and Jaecoo, that the Chery is a complement to the other two brands within dealerships in the UK?
It's a little bit of a odd situation, because Chery is obviously the parent company brand, but they've chosen to use that label for a brand that will sit actually a little bit below Omoda Jaecoo. Will the customers notice that or worry about it? I don't know. I mean, Çetaş have been selling the brand under a different name in Turkey for a couple of years. Their experience has been good. Our experience with Omoda Jaecoo has been good. So it's a question of trying to find the right location. I certainly wouldn't want a competitor to open up down the road selling a sister brand. So it's just a question of trying to find the right opportunities. But my understanding is that they're doing okay with the dealer recruitment. So far, we have a test drive event at Millbrook on Thursday to actually get a chance to drive the product. So we'll see.
Yeah. Like you say, I think we've got a year or two for it all to sort of wash through into all of this, but certainly mixing up the market a little bit. Well, I mean, lots to get our head around there, and lots, as you said right at the offset there, Steve. Lots from with the ICDP hats on in terms of that more global European UK market dynamics, but at the same time that front end operational running the Auto West London business as well. So a huge thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts on the market. I'm sure that today's or this morning's announcement will wash through, and we'll get a little bit more clarity as to what this sector is getting and who gets what within that, and we'll see if it has an impact or not, won't we, in time?
We will indeed. Interesting times, as they say.
It's never a dull day, is it?
No, not at all.
So it's brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the time.
That's a pleasure, Phil. Pleasure, Curtis.
Well, that's all for now. Many thanks for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Thanks once again to Steve for joining us and sharing some of his thoughts as an industry analyst and retailer. We're back with the headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed.